back into the tall grass as swiftly and silently as they had appeared, leaving only the heavy scent of cordite, blood, and wet fur hanging in the air. The echo of the shot lingered, ringing in our ears, louder and more terrifying than the river's roar had ever been. We didn't linger to mourn the king. Page 21. The acrid stench of cordite and the thick, coppery tang of lion's blood clung to us like a second, horrifying skin as we scrambled away from the riverbank, raw adrenaline lending temporary wings to our leaden, trembling legs. Safety was a phantom, a cruel joke. Every snapped twig underfoot echoed like a pursuing gunshot in the sudden, watchful silence of the savannah. We didn't stop running until the river's roar was a distant murmur and the primal scent of blood was overwhelmed by the dry, powdery smell of the rough track Kipera had directed us towards, a scar of packed, rust-red earth winding through the thinning scrub towards the hazy, improbable smudge of civilization on the horizon. Namabala, or death. The line felt perilously thin. Shelter materialized in the lee of a massive kopje, a jumble of ancient, weather-sculpted boulders offering a pocket of deep, cool shadow. Benga, breathing hard, sweat cutting tracks through the grime and blood on his face, wrestled the heavy canvas bag from my aching shoulder. He unstrapped it with fingers still trembling slightly from the lion encounter and the gun's savage kick, revealing its contents not as weapons or gleaming gold, but salvation of a profoundly mundane kind. 2 sets of cheap, blindingly bright rayon shirts and trousers, electric yellows and screaming blues adorned with dizzying geometric patterns that shrieked, "Clueless tourist." Beside them lay small, harshly scented bars of soap, thin, scratchy towels, and 2 ridiculously floppy canvas hats. Kipera's practicality was as unromantic as it was vital. A disguise woven from polyester absurdity. We stripped off our mud-caked, blood-flecked uniforms, the drab green of Masangiri regulars on Benga, Kwak's stolen black fatigues on me, garments that were now nothing less than wearable death warrants. The cool air raised gooseflesh on skin ingrained with days of sweat, fear, river spray, and lion's blood. Using precious water from our canteens and the harsh, heavy soap that smelled faintly of disinfectant and disappointment, we scrubbed frantically at faces, necks, and arms, the accumulated grit and gore coming away in gray-red swirls on the dusty ground. The transformation was absurd yet profound, a grotesque pantomime. Dressed in the garish clothes, the floppy hats pulled low over our brows, we looked like caricatures, lost, slightly ridiculous city dwellers hopelessly adrift in the vast, indifferent bush. Benga, despite the deep lines of strain etched around his eyes and the lingering pallor of his jungle illness, managed to slump his powerful shoulders, adopting a bewildered, defeated stoop. I hunched mine, trying to shrink into the loud, unforgiving fabric, becoming insignificant. Our stolen boots, the only tangible remnant of our brutal past, were scuffed desperately against rocks to mimic harmless, clueless wear. The rough track felt alien and unyielding underfoot after the forest's soft loam and the savannah's yielding grass. Dust, fine and red as powdered brick, puffed up with every step, coating our cheap trousers and sandaled feet. Benga, in a stroke of grim genius, had included flimsy flip-flops. The sun beat down, relentless, amplifying the synthetic itch of the rayon against our skin, turning the disguise into a sweaty prison. Hope was a fragile, terrified bird fluttering against the cage of my ribs. A bus. Just get on a bus. Blend into the human wallpaper. Disappear. Benga walked slightly ahead, scanning the shimmering horizon and the track's bends with the wary, hyper-focused intensity of a man expecting an ambush or a checkpoint around every curve. The silence between us stretched, thick with unspoken tension, the shared, gnawing awareness of Kwak's 3-day grace period evaporating faster than the puddles on the track, and the heavy memory of the lion's final, accusing stare. The rumble, when it finally came, was a mechanical growl cutting through the monotonous insect drone. An ancient bus, painted in a dizzying, sun-bleached patchwork of fading blues, greens, and jaundiced yellows, wheezed around a bend ahead, listing precariously under the immense weight of sacks, baskets, and humanity crammed onto its roof like some absurd, mobile shantytown. It shuddered to a groaning stop beside us in a choking cloud of red dust, the engine coughing and sputtering like a tubercular old man. A face, leathery and lined as a road map of hard miles, peered out from the driver's window, eyes sweeping our garish outfits with bored, dismissive appraisal. Going north, the driver yelled over the engine's asthmatic rattle. To the border town, Mabali sighed. Benga was instantly transformed. A wide, unnaturally vacant smile split his face, showing too many teeth. He stepped forward, waving a thick wad of the colorful, well-worn local currency Kipera had provided. Yes, tourists. Hakuna Matata. His voice was unnaturally loud, aggressively cheerful, the forced jollity as grating as fingernails on slate. We got lost. Walked for hours. Very happy to see bus. He thrust the money towards the driver like a winning lottery ticket. 2 tickets. To Mabali. Beautiful country. So green. The driver grunted, peeling off notes with the practiced speed of a hustler, utterly unmoved by the performance. Back bench. Only space. He jerked a grimy thumb towards the rear without looking. We clambered aboard, squeezing onto the very last bench already occupied by an elderly woman clutching a live, indignant chicken and a young man cradling a tinny transistor radio blaring distorted local pop. The air inside was thick and soupy, a suffocating miasma of stale sweat, acrid diesel fumes, overripe fruit, and the pungent, inescapable scent of the chicken. Bodies pressed close, hot and damp. Relief was a dangerous, dizzying narcotic. The engine roared with improbable effort, the bus lurched forward violently, and we were swallowed by the rattling, jolting metal beast heading north. For a blessed while, the monotonous rhythm of the bus, the drone of the straining engine, the hypnotic snippets of conversation in languages I barely understood, lulled me into a fragile, treacherous sense of anonymity. The garish shirt itched, the bench was hard, but we were moving. Benga leaned close, his tourist rictus replaced by a sharp, low whisper barely audible over the din and the radio's whine. Listen, once we cross near Mabali, ditch the bus before the main checkpoint. Quack's tentacles reach there. Find a truck, heading west, towards the mountains. Avoid. He paused, eyes flicking with predatory caution towards the woman in front of us, who seemed engrossed in soothing her clucking chicken. His name, at all costs. Like poison. I nodded, the fragile bird of hope beating a frantic tattoo against my ribs. Mountains. West. Freedom. The plan was gossamer thin, but it was a thread. Benga's gaze held mine, the intensity in his eyes emphasizing the razor's edge we walked. Not a word about. He didn't get to finish the sentence. The woman in front of us, the one with the large, tightly woven basket clutched protectively on her lap, had stiffened. Slowly, deliberately, as if pulled by invisible strings of dawning horror, she turned. Her eyes, wide with sudden, abject terror, locked first onto Benga's face, the sharp, unforgiving planes beneath the ridiculous floppy hat, the watchful, hunted intensity that no tourist disguise could fully smother, then snapped onto mine, recognition flaring like a struck match in the gloom. Her knuckles turned bone white on the basket handle. Her mouth opened, forming a silent, O of pure, unadulterated horror. Then it erupted. Quack. The name was a shriek, high-pitched and raw as a gutted animal, slicing through the bus's rumble like a scalpel. She scrambled sideways, pressing herself against the grimy window, pointing a trembling, accusatory finger directly at Benga's heart. Rebels. The word was a detonation in the confined space. These are rebels. Quack Danger's devils. Right here. Panic is a contagion that spreads faster than thought in a crowded metal box. A frozen, disbelieving second hung thick in the fetid air. Then chaos erupted, visceral and deafening. A woman screamed, pure primal terror. A man bellowed, out. Let me out, now. People surged towards the front, a human stampede tripping over baskets, shoving, trampling, desperate to escape the perceived, imminent slaughter in their midst. The chicken erupted in squawking frenzy. The driver slammed on the brakes with a guttural curse, the bus skidding violently on the loose dirt road, throwing everyone forward against seats and each other. The weight of the heavy bag slammed into my shins like a battering ram. Benga's hand shot out, gripping my arm like a vice, his fingers digging in with bruising force. His eyes met mine, not with panic, but with the terrifying, cold clarity of a man shedding one skin for another. The vacant tourist mask was gone, vaporized. In its place was the cold, desperate, lethally focused gaze of a cornered wolf assessing its final options. The flimsy game was catastrophically, irrevocably up. Here are pages 22 to 27 expanded with immersive detail, psychological depth, and satirical edge, adhering strictly to your constraints. Page 22. Time didn't slow, it shattered like cheap glass under a boot heel. The shrieks, raw, primal things tearing from throats, the lurching, neck-snapping stop, the press of terrified bodies scrambling over seats like panicked rats in a sinking ship, it all became a chaotic, nauseating blur painted in primary colors of fear. Benga moved, not with human hesitation, but with the lethal, reptilian precision honed in Quack's brutal proving grounds. He didn't think, he reacted. Shoving the heavy canvas bag off the seat and onto the grimy, vomit-splattered floor with a decisive thud, he became a human battering ram. Shoulders lowered, a force of pure survival instinct, he plowed forward, clearing a brutal path through the tangle of panicked passengers clawing towards the illusory sanctuary of the front door. His target, the driver, frozen in his cracked vinyl seat, eyes wide and white as saucers in the rearview mirror, reflecting pure, unadulterated horror. Do it, now, Benga roared back at me over the cacophony, his voice a whip crack of absolute command that sliced through the collective hysteria like a machete through rotten fruit. He reached the driver in 3 strides, grabbing the man's sweat-soaked collar and hauling him bodily from his seat with terrifying, effortless strength. The driver tumbled into the footwell with a truncated cry, a discarded puppet. In the same fluid, brutal motion, Benga pivoted, thrusting his hand back towards me. Cold, hard, unforgiving metal slammed into my palm, the heavy pistol Kipera had given him. Its weight was alien, terrifyingly final, a chunk of condensed violence and deathly consequence. Look dangerous. Point it. Sweep it like you mean to paint the walls. My fingers closed around the checkered grip, numb, instantly slick with cold sweat. Every fiber of my being screamed to drop the cursed thing, to fling it away like a venomous snake. But Benga's eyes, locked onto mine from the driver's seat he now commandeered, held no room for hesitation, no quarter for weakness. It was perform this grotesque pantomime of threat, or perish in the ensuing chaos. I raised the gun, my arm trembling violently, the muzzle describing drunken, wobbling circles in the fetid air. I swept it in a shaky, unconvincing arc across the rear half of the bus, a petrified tableau of faces pressed white against dusty windows, mothers crushing children to their breasts, men crouching low, hands over heads as if expecting the roof to cave in. The metallic snick as my thumb fumbled near the unfamiliar safety sounded deafening, a death knell in my own skull. Down. My voice emerged as a strangled, pathetic croak. I swallowed bile, forced air into lungs that felt lined with sandpaper. Everyone down. Flat on the floor. Now. The command felt absurd, theatrical, yet laced with the raw terror vibrating through me. Benga didn't wait for compliance, didn't gamble on my shaky authority. He wrestled the groaning gearshift. The ancient engine screamed in metallic protest, a sound of pure agony. Wheels spun uselessly for a heart-stopping second, churning the dirt road into a blinding, choking cloud of red dust that billowed thickly through the open windows, stinging eyes, coating tongues, turning the interior into a gritty, apocalyptic haze. We lurched forward with a neck-snapping jerk, then veered violently off the track, abandoning civilization for the scrubland's indifferent embrace. The bus crashed through low, thorny bushes, branches screeching against the flimsy metal sides like 1,000 fingernails dragged down a chalkboard. We hit a deep, hidden rut. The entire vehicle bucked like a spooked horse, throwing people off balance, sending bodies crashing against seats. A heavy sack of grain tumbled from the overhead rack, bursting open in an explosion of white flour that mingled grotesquely with the swirling red dust. The chicken, finally liberated from its terrified owner's grasp, erupted in a flurry of panicked wings and indignant squawks, flapping madly down the aisle like a feathered omen amidst the chaos. Stay down, I bellowed again, the gun trembling wildly, uselessly in my grip, my voice raw and cracking with a fear that mirrored the abject terror in the wide, rolling eyes staring up at me from the floor. I pressed myself against the vibrating, dust-caked rear wall, using it as shaky support, desperately trying to keep the muzzle pointed generally towards the stained ceiling tiles, away from the huddled, sobbing forms. The heavy bag lay forgotten at my feet, an anchor to a past rapidly disintegrating. Benga drove like a man possessed by vengeful spirits, hunched low over the shuddering wheel, eyes fixed with manic intensity on the scrubland ahead, aiming not for the distant, shimmering smudge of Mabali, but for a jagged, purpling line of ragged hills clawing at the horizon to the west. He ignored tracks, plowed through shallow, erosion-carved gullies, the bus groaning, shuddering, and protesting as if its rusted soul would shake loose and scatter across the savannah at any moment. Passengers sobbed, prayed in ragged gasps, retched onto the flour-dusted floor. The smell was a suffocating cocktail. Sour, metallic fear, acrid dust, spilled grain, diesel fumes, and the sharp ammonia tang of fresh urine. It was the perfume of our collective damnation. Then, through the dusty, bug-smeared windshield, the shimmering heat haze ahead resolved into dreaded, concrete reality, a police roadblock. Sandbag emplacements like primitive fortifications. A parked jeep with the ominous, snout-like barrel of a mounted machine gun pointing down the road. Figures in crisp, khaki uniforms waving bright red flags, signaling us to stop with imperious gestures. It was still a kilometer or more ahead, but closing with terrifying speed as Benga pushed the rattling bus to its limits. Benga's foot slammed the accelerator harder, flooring it. The engine howled, a wounded beast pushed beyond endurance. The bus shuddered violently as we hit another unseen dip, my teeth rattling in my skull like loose dice. The city, a sprawling, chaotic mess of low, sun-bleached buildings punctuated by taller, grimy structures, was now our only conceivable hope, a concrete jungle where two desperate, blood-smeared ghosts might vanish into the teeming masses. Benga aimed the protesting, death-rattling bus straight towards its ragged outskirts, towards a sprawling, chaotic marketplace visible even from this distance, a teeming, writhing anthill of humanity. Salvation, if it existed, lay only in overwhelming, anonymous chaos. The gun in my hand felt like it was burning a brand into my palm, a symbol of the violence we'd willingly embraced to escape a greater, more refined cruelty. The weight of Kwok's impending return pressed down, heavier than the bag, heavier than the gun, a suffocating dread written in the dust caking the dashboard, reflected in the terror of the passengers pressed flat beneath my trembling, fraudulent aim, etched into the desperate, granite set of Benga's shoulders as he wrestled the devil's own wheel towards the uncertain, chaotic sanctuary of the city. Page 23. The outskirts of the city weren't a boundary, they were a detonation. Ramshackle stalls, cobbled together from corrugated iron rusted to a rich patina, sun-bleached wood warped by time, and frayed, colorful tarpaulins, erupted beside the pothole track like fungal growths, spilling their chaotic wares onto the dusty margins. Perfect pyramids of sun-bright oranges, mountainous stacks of second-hand tires exuding a pungent aroma of baked rubber and forgotten journeys, bolts of wax print fabric exploding in dizzying, fluorescent patterns that hurt the eyes, leaning towers of bright plastic buckets, cages overflowing with clucking, flustered chickens. The air inside the bus, thick with the internal stench of fear, vomit, and dust, was suddenly overwhelmed, erased by a cacophony of smells. The sweet, greasy scent of frying plantains, the eye-watering punch of unfamiliar spices, the acrid bite of diesel exhaust, the overripe sweetness of mangoes piled high, and the underlying, persistent tang of open drains baking in the sun. The noise hit like a physical wave, a tsunami of sound. Vendors hawking wares in a frenetic chorus of a dozen dialects and languages, blaring horns from battered, overloaded trucks fighting for space, the tinny, distorted thump of competing radios leaking reggae, soukous, and static, the high-pitched shriek of children darting like minnows through the dense throng of legs. Benga's eyes, hawk-sharp despite the exhaustion, scanned the seething mass ahead. He spotted the market's pulsing epicenter, a particularly dense knot of stalls and bodies where the track widened slightly before being choked by the paved arteries of the city proper. Get ready. His voice was a guttural rasp, stripped of everything but pure, animal urgency. He didn't slow. If anything, he accelerated, coaxing one last protesting whine from the dying engine. The bus, a wounded metal beast, barreled towards the market's frenetic fringe. Now, go, lose yourself in it. He wrenched the wheel hard, sending the bus into a sickening, dust-churning skid that brought it screeching sideways, effectively blocking the narrow alley between two stalls selling towering stacks of black tires. Before the momentum even died, before the stunned, eerie silence inside the bus could crystallize into a fresh wave of panic or outrage, Benga slammed the gearshift into neutral and yanked the protesting handbrake with a final, decisive grunt. He was already moving, a blur of garish rayon, grabbing the heavy canvas bag from between my feet and shoving it brutally back into my arms. Its familiar weight was a shock, an anchor dragging me back to the grim reality of our flight. Now, the command was a physical push. He kicked the bus door open. The metal shrieked in protest, bending outwards. We didn't run, we plunged. Out of the metal coffin thick with the reek of terror, into the vibrant, chaotic, overwhelming heart of the marketplace. The sensory contrast was jarring, disorienting. One moment, the oppressive, metallic closeness, the trembling weight of the gun now hastily tucked into my waistband beneath the shirt, the taste of dust and dread. The next, a full frontal assault of color that vibrated, sound that pounded the eardrums, and humanity in constant, jostling motion. Benga didn't look back, didn't offer a farewell or a plan. He simply ducked low, a predator melting into shadow, vanishing instantly between two towering walls of black tires that smelled intensely of sun-baked rubber and ancient dust. I veered instinctively in the opposite direction, diving headlong into a seething throng gathered around a stall that was a waterfall of brightly colored fabric, cascades of emerald green, sunset orange, deep indigo, dazzling yellows. The vendor, a formidable woman draped in layers of her own vibrant stock, was engaged in a passionate, full-bodied argument with a customer, arms windmilling, voice booming over the din. I pushed past, the heavy bag bumping rudely against legs, earning muttered curses in languages thick and guttural, the meaning clear despite the unfamiliar words. The crowd absorbed me. One moment I was a fleeing rebel with a death sentence stitched into my garish shirt. The next I was just another anonymous body in the relentless press, a young man burdened by a suspiciously heavy bag, head down, sweating profusely in the oppressive midday heat. I kept moving, not running. Running screamed guilt, but walking with a purpose I didn't feel, letting the human current carry me deeper into the labyrinthine intestines of the market. Stalls blurred past in a sensory overload. Baskets of glistening fish laid out on melting beds of ice, mountains of charcoal sacks leaking black dust, pungent stalls selling mysterious dried meats and spices that made my eyes stream and my nose tingle, tables groaning under gleaming piles of tomatoes, onions, and glossy eggplants. The air vibrated not just with sound, but with the energy of commerce and survival, fierce haggling, sudden bursts of laughter, the rhythmic sizzle of meat on makeshift grills. I dared one glance back. The bus stood skewed and silent near the tire stalls, its door hanging open like a slack, defeated jaw. Figures were emerging cautiously, blinking in the sudden, harsh sunlight, looking around dazed, like survivors stumbling from a shipwreck. No sign of Benga, no sign of immediate pursuit. Yet, I clutched the heavy bag tighter, its rough canvas straps biting into my shoulder through the thin rayon. It was my only tangible link to the nightmare forest we'd escaped, to Kipera's grudging, fear-laced aid, to Benga's desperate, violent gamble. Its weight was immense, not just the physical burden, but the crushing weight of Kwok's 3-day deadline ticking relentlessly in my skull, the phantom weight of the gun pressed against my skin, the heavy guilt of the lives we'd disrupted, the bus passengers terrorized, the Lion King we'd killed for the crime of being a lion. The forest had tested us with teeth, thorns, and hunger. The city offered a different, more complex gauntlet, cloaked in noise, anonymity, and a million unseen threats. Kwok was in Switzerland, spinning lies for diplomats over crystal glasses. We had maybe 72 hours before the hunter returned, vengeance burning cold in his eyes. The concrete jungle sprawled around me, vast, indifferent, teeming, offering both potential sanctuary and a million new, intricate ways to die. The heavy bag was my burden, my poisoned lifeline, and my ticking clock. I adjusted its strap, wincing as it dug in, lowered the ridiculous floppy hat further over my eyes, and let the crowd's relentless, uncaring tide pull me deeper into the suffocating unknown, the scent of spices, exhaust, and humanity filling my lungs, the echo of the woman's shriek, rebels. Kwok Danger's devils, still ringing faintly, persistently, in the deepest, darkest caverns of my mind. The next move was mine alone. The next danger, unseen, unpredictable. The green hell was behind us. The real, intricate, and potentially more perilous battle for survival had just slammed headlong into its next, uncharted, concrete chapter. Page 24. Namabala City didn't welcome. It consumed, digesting newcomers in its vast, rumbling gut of cracked concrete, corrugated iron rusted to lace, and the perpetual, cloying atmosphere thick with diesel fumes, the greasy sweet scent of frying plantains, and the raw, sweaty odor of humanity pressed too close, breathing each other's air. For Benga and me, reunited later that day in a tense, wordless encounter near a stinking open sewer, it was a landscape paved with hidden teeth. Every uniformed figure, the bored, sweaty police in ill-fitting khaki, the more alert military patrols with watchful eyes, even the dust-covered park rangers looking incongruous, became a potential knife aimed directly at our exposed throats. We moved like wraiths through its sun-baked, garbage-strewn arteries, our stolen wealth a constant, leaden weight concealed within the rough canvas bag now slung beneath Benga's loose, dusty, tourist-bright rayon shirt, a grotesque secret bulging against the garish pattern. Dodging suspicious eyes became our grim, perpetual ballet. We ate on the move like feral dogs, greasy, doughy mandazi snatched from street vendors whose own eyes darted away too quickly, too knowingly, as they took our crumpled notes, lukewarm bottles of sickly sweet cola bought with trembling hands from dim kiosks shrouded in faded, sun-bleached plastic sheeting that flapped like ragged ghosts. Sleep was stolen in stolen moments, in doorways that reeked of urine, under market stalls long abandoned for the night, their skeletal frames offering scant cover, anywhere the pooled shadows were deep enough and indifferent enough to swallow two fugitives still carrying the ghost of Olumo Forest in the set of their shoulders and the wary flicker in their eyes. The city's rhythm was a discordant, never-ending symphony, the incessant honking of overloaded Matatus fighting for inches, the blaring cacophony of radios spilling competing music from tinny speakers, the constant, low hum of generators, and beneath it all, the thrumming bass line of pure, unvarnished desperation. It grated against the primal silence still ringing in my ears, a constant, abrasive reminder of how far we'd fallen from the green hell that had forged our bond in fear and flight. Benga became a creature divided. Part shadow, part sleek, black kabam phone. The phone was his lifeline, his oracle, his obsession. He'd vanish into the reeking mouth of a narrow alleyway, pressing the device to his ear, murmuring in the guttural, rhythmic cadence of Guludian. Not the common trade tongue, but a deeper, older dialect that sounded like stones grinding together in a riverbed, laden with hidden meaning. Ngolo Tala Kabantu Sha Mwitu. The hyena watches the people of the forest. Isha Kwalia means Akubu Makama M Lima. The true work begins to rumble like the mountain. His voice, usually brash or commanding, dropped to a conspiratorial rasp, his knuckles white on the cheap plastic casing. He'd emerge minutes later, eyes glittering with a fervor I didn't trust, muttering cryptic fragments about channels opening, debts being honored in shadow, and the old paths stirring. I learned to swallow my questions, to let the unspoken pact between us, survival first, understanding never, thicken the already suffocating air in our shared, tense silences. The fervor in his eyes when he spoke of the forest felt like a dangerous undertow pulling him back towards the very terror we'd fled. Late on the second punishing day, fortune, or perhaps sheer, bone-grinding exhaustion, led us to the far eastern fringe of the city, where the buildings slumped against each other like weary, drunken men after a long fight. Above a cacophonous tire repair shack that vibrated perpetually with the pneumatic shriek of air wrenches and the clang of hammers on steel rims, we found a room. It wasn't sanctuary. It was a concrete box, barely larger than Quok's cell, perpetually infused with the acrid smell of burnt rubber, stale sweat, mildew, and profound defeat. A single grimy window, opaque with dust and grease, overlooked a depressing labyrinth of rusting corrugated iron roofs and a dangerous tangle of exposed, buzzing electrical wires. The thin, stained mattress on the bare concrete floor felt like a slab of chilled stone. But it had a lock. A flimsy, cheap thing that wouldn't stop a determined child, but a psychological barrier nonetheless. We collapsed onto it, the city's relentless roar a discordant lullaby, the bag of money a hard, treacherous pillow beneath Benga's head. Sleep, when it came, was thin and haunted. Page 25. The third Namabaladon arrived hotter, heavier, the air thick enough to chew, tasting of exhaust and impending rain that refused to fall. A brittle, necessary purpose drove us out of the reeking room and deeper into the city's chaotic, grasping heart. The commercial district pulsed with a different energy, frantic, avaricious, a stark contrast to the desperate survivalism of the outskirts. Shop fronts yawned open, spilling bolts of vibrant wax print fabric in eye-searing, geometric patterns. Stalls displayed pirated electronics hissing static from tinny speakers. The very air shimmered with the tang of chili peppers, cumin, cardamom, and the ubiquitous sizzle of cheap oil. We scanned the teeming streets not just for threats now, but for opportunity, for a chink in the city's armor, a place to launder not just our presence but our tainted wealth into something resembling legitimacy. We needed to become ghosts with bank accounts. That's when the jackals found us. We'd turned down a narrow alley shortcut, seeking respite from the main avenue's press, shadows deepening between high, stained walls. Four lean shapes detached themselves from the smoky gloom pooling outside a raucous betting den, their movements fluid, unnervingly coordinated, predatory. They fanned out with practiced ease, blocking the alley's exit ahead and subtly closing the space behind us. The leader stepped forward, a man with skin like worn leather and a single gold-capped tooth that flashed like a malignant star when he grinned. His eyes, cold and calculating as a butcher, assessing meat, lingered unerringly on the suspicious bulge beneath Benga's loose rayon shirt. Wazunu asterisk wa mtaa. Hey, street foreigners. His voice was deceptively casual, oiled with false camaraderie. That bag under there, looks heavy for such light travelers, Let us help carry your burden, Rafiki, for a small fee, of course. A tax for safe passage. He gestured expansively at the grimy alley walls as if he owned them. Benga didn't hesitate. His response wasn't anger. It was the terrifying, economical violence of a Guludian border enforcer, muscle memory forged under Quok's exacting, brutal tutelage. One moment he stood relaxed, the picture of weary indifference. The next, he was a blur of garish yellow and blue. A sickening crack echoed off the alley walls as he seized the gold-toothed leader's extended wrist, twisting it with brutal, bone-snapping precision. The man's scream was cut off before it fully formed as Benga's knee pistoned upwards like a piston, connecting with brutal force against his exposed throat. He dropped like a sack of wet cement, clutching his neck, making choked, gurgling sounds, his eyes bulging with shock and agony. Instinct, honed by terror and violence in Olumo's green crucible, took over my body before my mind could register the horror. I pivoted sharply as the thug on my left lunged, a crude, wickedly curved panga knife flashing dully in the shadowed light. My elbow, driven by pure adrenaline and survival reflex, slammed upwards into the soft hollow beneath his ribcage with a force that expelled all breath in a whooshing gasp. He folded in half, collapsing to his knees, gasping like a landed fish, the knife clattering harmlessly onto the filthy cobblestones. The third thug, momentarily stunned by the swift, brutal efficiency of the counterattack, froze, eyes wide. Banga didn't give him time to recover. He flowed past the choking leader, delivering a flat-palmed, open-handed strike to the side of the frozen man's head. The impact was sharp, final. It snapped the man's head sideways with unnatural force. He crumpled bonelessly to the ground, twitching once before lying still. The fourth, his bravado evaporating into pure, wide-eyed terror, turned to flee. Banga's foot, moving with cobra speed, hooked his ankle mid-stride, sending him sprawling face first onto the hard stones with a grunt of pain. We stepped over the groaning, twitching forms without a backward glance, without a word. The few potential onlookers who had been drawn by the commutation instantly melted back into doorways or turned away, faces carefully averted. In Namabala, survival was a brutal spectator sport best watched from a safe, anonymous distance. No sirens wailed in the distance. Justice here was swift, personal, often fatal, and rarely involved uniforms. The encounter was a brutal baptism by fire for our new, urban reality. It also, unexpectedly, yielded fruit. As Banga stepped over the gold-toothed leader, his hand dipped, quick as a pickpocket, and emerged with a slightly crumpled business card. Jomo Otieno, Property Solutions. No dream too small. Desperation, it seemed, could forge strange opportunities from the pockets of the defeated. Page 26. The fourth Namabaladon saw us transformed, shedding our grimy chrysalis above the tire shop like snakes discarding old, stained skin. In its place, standing with improbable, almost arrogant prominence amidst the chaotic bustle of a central avenue thick with honking traffic and jostling crowds, was the silent page. Lavish wasn't hyperbole, it was a statement. We'd poured the blood ivory money, Kwok's ill-gotten gains, harvested from butchered giants and smuggled through shadow, into creating an oasis of calculated, improbable elegance. Polished, mahogany shelves, dark and rich as congealed blood, soared towards a high ceiling where lazy, slowly rotating fans stirred the expensive air. Glass display cases, softly lit from within like secular reliquaries, cradled first editions and leather-bound volumes with reverence, their gilt titles gleaming. Deep armchairs, upholstered in plush burgundy velvet the color of dried wine, sat in inviting clusters, promising sanctuary and quiet contemplation. The air hummed not with the city's chaos, but with the crisp, clean scent of new paper, the deep, comforting musk of old bindings and knowledge, and the faint, expensive tang of lemon oil used on the gleaming wood. It was a front, yes, a beautiful, imposing fortress meticulously constructed on a foundation of stolen tusks and terror. But standing behind the immaculate, cool solidity of the polished mahogany counter, feeling its smoothness beneath my palms, it also felt like the first truly solid ground I'd touched in months. A future, however stained, bought at an unspeakable price. A temple to silence, funded by screams. Banga, however, seemed less anchored by the solidity. He paced the polished teak floorboards, a restless panther confined within a gilded cage. His sleek Kabam phone was rarely out of his hand, a dark talisman against the cultured surroundings. He'd pause, snatch up the copy of the asterisk Namabala trumpet spread open on the counter, scan the headlines with predatory intensity, then resume his prowling, the soft click of his boot heels echoing in the hushed space. That morning's edition screamed in bold, triumphant type, historic Kwok Peace Pact sealed in Zurich. Forest General integrates forces into National Army. Below it, a smaller, more ominous headline nestled, Deputy President's Regional Office established in heart of Olumo territory. Banga slapped the paper with the flat of his hand, a grim, savage satisfaction twisting his lips. See, Masangiri. His voice was a low growl in the quiet shop. Tumbo Karaya swallows his pride like a bitter ball of cold ugali. He choked it down. He had no choice. Kwok holds the forest, and the forest is the peace now. He traced the smaller headline about the forest office with a thick, calloused finger, the nail still rimmed with ingrained dirt no amount of city living could erase. Clever, roots and power, twisted together like the oldest strangler fig. He'll rule from the shadows, from the damp earth and the thick canopy, where he's strongest. Where his teeth are sharpest. The city politicians. Banga snorted derisively, gesturing vaguely towards the window and the government buildings beyond. They can have their marble tombs and their pointless titles. Quack has the living earth. The real power. Asterisk. I watched the endless parade of city life through the spotless plate glass window. A kaleidoscope of faces flowed past. Harried businessmen clutching briefcases, laughing students weighed down by backpacks, weary mothers shepherding children. Did any sense the ghosts haunting this new, elegant establishment? The specter of the forest hanging over the polished wood. Safer for us, Benga? I asked, my voice low, barely disturbing the expensive silence. This, stability, or just a different kind of trap? A bigger cage, maybe, with a nicer view and velvet cushions. Asterisk. He stopped pacing abruptly, turning to face me. The fervor in his eyes was back, amplified now, mixed with something else, a desperate, gnawing hunger that unsettled me more than his violence. It's opportunity, asterisk, he insisted, jabbing a finger towards the gleaming shelves. Stability. A chance to finally breathe. To build something visible. And, asterisk, he paused, his gaze shifting towards the door, as if he could see through the city sprawl too. The distant green mass on the horizon, proximity. Asterisk. Page 27. The bomb dropped 2 evenings later, shattering the fragile, expensive calm we'd cultivated within the plush confines of the silent page. We were in the small, functional back office, the air thick with the comforting scent of strong, spiced chai brewing on a hot plate and the muffled symphony of the city beyond the thick door. Benga hadn't touched his cup. He stared into the middle distance,